Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, an AMSYS and SiliconExpert live Q&A. Don't let obsolescence manage you. Brought to you by AMSYS and SiliconExpert. I'm George Corralius, and I, along with Dwight Morse, will be your moderators today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. You can participate in today's Q&A session by asking questions at any time during this webinar. Just type your question into the Q&A text box and then click the Submit button. At this time, we recommend you disable your pop-up blockers. At the end of the webinar, we will ask you to complete our feedback form. Your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve future events. You can also launch the survey at any time by clicking on the red survey button at the bottom of the console. If you are experiencing any technical problems, please type your issue into the Q&A text area, and we will be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. Today's session is a continuation of our webinar demonstrating the advantages of using AMSYS and SiliconExpert to mitigate your obsolescence risk. You can access this webinar and the March Q&A session by going to the Knowledge Center page on the SiliconExpert website. It's titled An Introduction to Proactive Obsolescence Case Management. The link is also available in the Resource tab of this webinar. So to answer your questions today, we have Bjoern Bartels, Managing Director at AMSYS. Bjoern has worked in the field of consultancy by supporting his global customers with obsolescence management, core competencies and tactics for many years. And Oliver Hoffman, EMEA Director at SiliconExpert. Oliver's passion is sharing knowledge and insights into solving problems by applying data-driven decision-making. Bjoern and Oliver have worked together for many years, bound by the desire to mitigate obsolescence risk for companies all over the world. And now let's get into our AMSYS and SiliconExpert live Q&A. Bjoern, Oliver, Dwight, let's start with the questions.
That sounds great. Thank you, George. I'm going to start with a question of my own, actually. How did you two guys meet?
That's a pretty good question, Dwight. As a start off, many years ago already, as far as I remember, I think we both just share the same passion of making the world a little better. So what kind of is combining data and processes and so on. I think we met through institutes that are commonly known out there that take care of the matter of obsolescence management. This is where we met, having a coffee and so on. And we're not only business partners and stuff and are working together and combining data and processes. Oliver, I would say we became friends over the years, sharing the same passion. What would you say?
I think it began on one of those industrial quarterly events where obsolescence management is being discussed. And among those 100 participants, there were two who said that obsolescence is not ultimately a bad thing. It can be fun and very satisfying if you manage it properly. And ended up convincing each other what could be more fun. We ended up discovering that we both are process-driven consultative people that try to see the same thing from different angles, finding out that we are trying to solve the same problem. So,
well, we've got a number of questions.
Technology, and both we like technologies and good drinks. So we share a lot of time with another.
Well, we've got a lot of questions that came in for the webinar about obsolescence, so I guess this is going to be a lot of fun for you guys. Let me start off with one from Jenny from Cadence. She says, we're observing life cycle changes to last time buy and even obsolescence without advanced notification from various manufacturers. What's the best course for a company when they have limited time to react in this type of change?
Should I go first, Bjoern?
Oliver, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So I will leave you the time on the inside of what a company is doing. And therefore, when it comes to saving time, that puts you into the situation of, I don't have much time because I need to react quickly. That is the very nature of reactive obsolescence management. And when time is a shortage in itself, not just the components, that means we became aware of a problem that required a solution a bit late. And late is not just defined by how short is the time in between getting the notification and having to place my last order, or when production is being stopped or it was already stopped. It's also when the message is out there, how do you capture it? And having the sensors or the radar about how do I filter out relevant events that I need to respond to on the outside. You could have people on your teams that monitor that on purpose, or you are using services that try to monitor the world out there in a repetitive and easy to use manner, which would be SiliconExpert. Indeed, yes, I am suggesting within reactive obsolescence management, you are going to have more time the earlier you know about an event. It cannot be notified earlier in a reactive way when it comes to relying on product change notifications, but there are other events that might be comments on manufacturer websites. There might be additional comments and sometimes even watermarks in data sheets. And from the time-saving perspective, again, it's get the notifications earlier. If you don't get them directly, and you might be, which I just somehow assume for you being in an AMSYS and SiliconExpert webinar, there are ways on how to subscribe to these events, alerts, and PCNs through SiliconExpert, and our team members, account managers, and so on, would be happy to help you to configure these listening and sensing mechanisms within your SiliconExpert subscription so that you can get the input. But the real time saving while you are doing it, that, if not more, would be the answer that Bjoern can provide.
Okay. But there are some times, I think, Bjoern, that these change notifications come late, and it's not anything that you can do about that. It's just that the company doesn't send out the change notifications until it's almost too late to react. So Oliver was talking about reactive obsolescence management. Tell us a little bit about proactive obsolescence management.
I mean, I would directly pick up on the title of today's webinar. Don't let obsolescence manage you. Sure. First step is if you want to get a little better in terms of obsolescence or even shortage management, or we'll for sure talk about later a little, is that you get a good reactive process in place. You need data for it, that's for sure. You get that from Silicon Data. However, we do automate processes. That's the first step. However, the big return on invest comes only when you're before the certainty that you will encounter a problem. Meaning, I mean, being that I was the German spokesman of the IEC 6242 Obsolescence Management Standard Revision, and it is in the standard saying that once there is certainty that you will encounter a problem, with or without advance notice, if you don't get an advance notice, for sure you're pretty much more screwed than if you get a notice a couple of months in advance. But if you want to get out of that pitfall, you have to be proactive. Talking about proactively is not, or how to be proactive. That is the next question. Then actually, is not only being capable of forecasting technologies, getting the right data in place, and so on. Being proactive is much more, and you need to combine several types of data. I don't want to talk about big data here, but combining data doesn't only mean that you have a huge chunk of data in the end, because out of this data, you want to generate information to then generate knowledge and so on to, for example, what is then usually stated as a proper redesign, refresh, planning, optimization, where you don't only focus on single events in obsolescence notices and overcoming certain issues, but really planning obsolescence, not in terms that it is planned that certain items will become obsolete at a certain point of time, but really planning for obsolescence, what usually starts pretty early in your overall own product lifecycle stage, namely in your engineering. So proactive obsolescence management starts pretty early in your own product lifecycle. You need to combine a lot of data to generate information and stuff to not let obsolescence manage you.
That's great. So basically what you're saying is that if I plan ahead that this is definitely going to happen, then when it does happen, and not something that I look forward to, but when it does happen, then I'm prepared to react to it much more quickly than I would have been otherwise.
Plus, if I can pick on that, if you are capable of forecasting the obsolescence date or most likely obsolescence date in the future for one item in your overall bill of material or even multi-level bill of material, you're capable of doing that for several parts. You can not only proactively act on several issues at the same time, you can also proactively scare engineering resources to really focus on when redesigns or re-engineering of certain overall products are needed, and not waste resources on just being pure reactive with more or less good steered firefighting methods.
And Oliver, SiliconExpert has an algorithm, don't they, for end of life and predicting the end of life for parts?
Yes, I was about to ask for that, more on a homework for you, but that's the second point. Yes, we are using an algorithm that predicts the year of a component with an accuracy of currently about 93%, augmenting the reliability of this algorithm for quite a while now. Therefore, this is proactive obsolescence management. If you choose a component, select something that has a projected years to end of life, of the longer the better, basically. But just one or two more comments about the question as you have asked it. I think part of the question was that the last time buy or obsolescence date is not in the future. It's like an immediate notification. And I remember that in the pre-COVID times, like in the 2018, our analysis had shown that 6% of PCNs were notifying about an end-of-life date that was more than 1 year in the future, whereas 28% of all PCNs were effective immediately, and also more than 30% of PCNs or end-of-lives have been communicated without a PCN in general, that went through email and that went through data sheets and that went through website announcements. So therefore, I think the problem of last time buy and end-of-life being immediately is not really new. I dare to say that thanks to COVID, the impact is it's no longer just 28% of immediately effective product discontinuance notices, but it's a higher amount. But the problem in itself is not new. So I'm a bit shy of thinking we need a new mechanism. Probably we need a higher discipline of applying what was already there, at least for using the systems, and make a combination of getting data into the right processes is becoming just more important because the problems are just occurring more frequently on a lower or on a shorter notice period.
I'm glad you brought up COVID. We actually have another question that deals with that. And this one comes from Stephen at CommScope. Any comments or immediate learning from the COVID-19 pandemic that can influence our thinking going forward? Also, do we see end-of-life risks lessening as we approach the technology boundaries on wafer fab geometries, et cetera? Or will the absolute technology shifts and feature sets still drive the end-of-life trends as we know it?
Let me try to go first again, because this one, let's say, it reminds me so much of one of my favorite books, that like The Innovator's Dilemma, that describes that technology shifts, one generation completely replacing another one. That is almost in the nature of innovation. Like, we so often talk about obsolescence as if it were bad, But it is kind of the necessity to make innovation really happening. Only if we can really say goodbye to old technology, the industry can embrace the new one. Being forced to change by an external entity is not pleasant, because we as human beings don't always like change. That's in our nature. That's okay. And as companies, we know that change that is forced from the outside is just costly. Fully agreeing to my own statement of years ago that the root of all evil is obsolescence. It's probably the awareness of probably we need manufacturers to obsolete certain components that are no longer producible with a reasonable margin so that the industry can move forward and generate better products. It forces us to stay competitive, but in order to stay competitive, we have to have our acts together. COVID-19 wise, lessons learned is it has been an accelerator for the problem. And the solutions mechanisms need to be a bit more responsive. I think Skip has been as entertaining in that increase of the problem and the increase of the bitterness when we are trying to digest the new momentum that obsolescence has. But yeah, maybe to say, I'm now handing over to Bjoern.
I mean, talking about COVID, the wording is pretty fast to shortage. What is obviously happening on the market, long lead times and stuff. Is COVID the cause? I mean, Oliver, on the one hand, you said it quite well. It's an accelerator. However, I wouldn't say that COVID in the end is the cause of, or not the sole cause of what is happening in the shortage market today. So COVID is, and I agree on that one, is accelerating obsolescence on the one hand, because we don't only see long lead times as a result. We only see of really next hires assembly manufacturers of commercial off-the-shelf equipment, not only electronic components, really shortening down production lines that are not really profitable and stuff. I get that. However, I think the whole market on top of COVID changed over the last years. I mean, I don't only want to talk about like just-in-time production, no more excess stock available because we want to keep down investment that is just laying around there in our stocks and so on. So why is everyone having a problem these days on shortages? And then COVID is an accelerator. It's not because of COVID, but that, let's get that straight. Every one of us is having one of these smartphones. Let's get that straight. How long are they on the market? And products need to be obsolete. I mean, I still remember my first phone. Well, was a landline phone, actually, and still wired to the wall at my mom's house. No one is still using that. We don't even have a landline in our whole office and stuff. I have the newest MacBook. I have a flat screen TV and so on. So funny thing is, what I usually ask in the seminars that we are given is, I mean, everyone is usually complaining about the matter of obsolescence and shortage in their business experience. Most of the people don't realize that, on the other hand, they thrive it and they drive it on the personal side of their lives. Because I would love to ask a question to all the attendees at the moment, who is still using like really old phones and so on, where you have to get the antenna out and stuff. And I would say maybe no one. So on the one hand, the whole semiconductor market and so on is going into a direction where they are most profitable, so where there's the highest demand. And there's a couple of companies out there like these Apples and Samsungs and so on, and many more that are really dictating the market. So why should even some manufacturer build specific IC semiconductors for a market where there is a need of 100 each per year and so on? So summing up that, not COVID alone is the reason that we will encounter more obsolescence issues, more shortage problems, and so on over 2020, 2021, and over the upcoming years. It is us, on the one hand, how we use electronic equipment and all other equipment in private life. However, we still complain if our company might hopefully not stop production because we can't get the items in time because they are on a location or they are already got obsoleted. So, yeah.
Yeah, one of the keywords that you used there, Bjoern, was demand. And I think that one of the things that happened during COVID is that demand changed. And it changed obviously for electronics, but it changed for everything. People stopped going to restaurants, for instance. And so you had more canned and bottled beverages and less fountain drinks, right? And so Coca-Cola needed to change their processes. And the toilet paper that is used in office buildings is different than the toilet paper that is used at homes. And so we saw a shortage of that. Yeah. We saw fewer people that were buying cars because they weren't driving as much. And so the car manufacturers didn't need as many microchips. And then once they got out of line, they found that they had to get back in line at the end. And now they're working on their suppliers and trying to get these cars manufactured. Is there any part of managing obsolescence where you're trying to see what's coming down the road as far as technology is concerned? For instance, green energy and how that might affect some of your products and what to do about that?
If I can pick on that, and because you asked the question on the process-wise, I would like to ask the question: is there any difference between shortage and obsolescence? And that's the thing someone might think about. According to standards, an item is obsolete when it's no longer in production by the manufacturer. So obviously, shortage is not included. However, in real life, wherever you are targeted by obsolescence or shortage, it might result in your production completely being interrupted, or you cannot support systems any longer. So when people are talking about shortages, long lead times, and so on, as no one of us is willing to wait for items 52 weeks and longer, shortage is, for me, process-wise, something like a de facto obsolescence. Both need the same management disciplines behind it. Either, if you want to be a pure reactive cause, both will result in the same actions inside your company internally, whether you just got a PCN or PDN or your supplier just called you up, hey, the lead times just got up to a year or two, or prices increased by, 400%. It screws you up. So as a matter of fact, same processes come in place internally. And as I would say, collaboration internally and externally and really steering all this data that you need to find the best in place solution and so on needs collaboration to find at least the most valid reactive solution once it really hits you. Question is on the other hand, and maybe Oliver, you can talk on that a little more, how it is on the proactive side. We all know that we can forecast technologies and so on. So can we forecast shortage? Is there anyone out there who could have told me already in 2019 that there will be a COVID-19 pandemic around there, plus all the other influencing factors that will hit me hard? I don't know.
Well, if I may, I have two comments on that. First one would be, yes, agreed, obsolescence is never just obsolescence. And by that, I mean, if it's not available, I have to solve this reactively. I don't mind if this is because of a product discontinuance notice, or maybe I have just received a product change notification saying form or fit or function has changed, or this is an errata message, meaning, yeah, last week I sent you a data sheet with the specification you designed in this component, but actually we have changed this parameter completely because we happen to have it produced completely differently. So we are updating the data sheet instead of making the component fit the original data sheet. That is requiring us to find a component that does what we have originally designed into our product. It's the very same process, but it is not based on an event that is called an end of life or an obsolescence notice. Therefore, obsolescence is far more than just obsolescence, even though all these other things that smell similarly like obsolescence can be managed in a very similar way. And I've forgotten my second comment.
That's fine. Don't worry about it. So one of the things that COVID taught us too was that what is important, but where is also very important. So where your suppliers are, right? What countries they happen to be in, whether or not you're going to be able to get products out of there. One of the things I think that we saw with COVID was factories and social distancing, and as different countries were having increases in the pandemic, then manufacturing tended to slow down. What does SiliconExpert provide, Oliver, with regard to sourcing information?
Sourcing information. I'll try to keep it short, because sourcing in the context of supply chain, we have provided a new tool that now also allows to forecast based on insights how the price, how the lead time, and how the stock is going to look like. But what we do have with historic trends is diagrams about how minimum and average price for a single component have been trending throughout the last year. We know how the average stock per distributor has been increasing and decreasing month by month, and lead time as well. We know if lead time in general was flip-flopping up and down, or staying flat and consistent, or if manufacturers had to make a decision on, we try to stay attractive by lowering the reported minimum lead time, but we are increasing the maximum lead time from factory to stock and distributor. So those behaviors, specifically where there is a bigger distance in between minimum to maximum lead time, is something which I have seen significantly more frequently lately, specifically actually in the last 3 months. Not yet in 2020. This is a 2021 phenomenon, at least in the data points that I see occasionally. And this is just what I am using in my occasional demos of SiliconExpert. This is not a complete database analytics, but when it comes to experience, the gap in between minimum to maximum lead time is new. And then making educated guesses based on machine learning for the next 3 months for lead time, for price, for stock. That is in our new supply chain tool as well.
Great. And when it comes to machine learning,
let me pick on that, because I see that on the market as well, where SiliconExpert is providing great data and is advancing also on lead times and so on. You can get great reports. We as a process provider, what sits behind it, and we use SiliconExpert data in our application as well, for sure. This is why we do the seminar, actually. We see actually a lot of our customer approaching us, besides having all the forecasts and obsolescence and actual statuses and replacements and stuff all in one tool. They also want to have lead time analysis, so to say, pricing analysis and stuff. However, I wouldn't agree that this is having all this data again is the final solution, because in the end, if you would tell me, okay, maximum lead time would be, I don't know, a year or so. If I only need the component in 2 years, it will be completely fine with me if lead times arise. So, and I really think this is the mistake most of companies are doing. They gather a lot of data from the outside world through SiliconExpert, through manual sourcing of data, talking to their supply chain and so on, and they identify this as risk. However, this is not risk, because you need to combine your internal data as well, because you wouldn't even worry about lead times if you have enough stock in your own warehouse. You wouldn't mind about lead times if you would never ever need this item again. You wouldn't worry about lead times if you would have known in advance that you have already 5 qualified alternatives, your approved manufacturers part list that have a low lead time. So I think key to success here is especially being proactive, combining external and internal data to full-scale risk analysis to really generate information, and only the information that you need, not all the information from everywhere, to take the right decisions in time and really focus on the items that might be at risk in your company. Because when you're working for one company A, you wouldn't worry if company B is having a problem or not, as long as it's not your supplier.
Okay, thank you, Bjoern. I want to pivot to some of the questions that are coming in live. Anthony from Alstom asks, or he's saying that by the time they get an end of life or last time buy notification, it's usually sole sourced with no cross references. So everyone else is scrambling for the product. How do you manage this?
If I just pick on the last statements I did. So, Anthony, thanks a lot for the question. So, if you, no matter if after last time buy, you and all the others in the world that need the item are sourcing for the same part, the question is actually that I have to you. So, if this is a critical component to you, where you would have deemed yourself to manage it proactively, so even in the end, and be ensured that every item will become obsolete at a certain point in time, why didn't you qualify alternative items in advance? Because you would have realized that if you would have sourced the information that this is a critical item based on your internal ABCLs or some analysis where you might have wanted to see, is this the central integrated circuit that I'm using in pretty much every item of my product? So simple question is, you should have been proactive. I feel you have been not, and that's fine, although I know Alstom is pretty proactive on the market. Let's get that straight. Once it comes even to alternative components and so on, in the end, this is where you need good data and so on. And this is where I hand over to Oliver again.
Yeah, so there are 2.5 times where you can make data-driven decisions on such a single source management problem. The first one is being proactive. Yes, agreed. As I know that some sites of Alstom's are using SiliconExpert, there is something like multi-sourcing risk, which is being calculated for complete bill of materials or any list. And you would see an increase of single source risk in a bill of material as soon as a dual source transitions into a single source. The recommendation would be for product owning responsibles to check rating or risk report for a bill of material on a quarterly or, let's say, a 6-monthly basis to see if certain types of risk, such as single sources, are increasing. The second element of data-driven decision in there is first, the one that you are describing. No form fit function alternatives seem to be available on the market anymore. That might happen, and the question that you're trying to answer is, what does the world market offer me? When we are so late that even the second and third sources have expired and are fully obsoleted, then there is a way of identifying which parameters of a certain component have made this component so relevant, so irreplaceable for the business continuity of this specific product of mine, that a type of parametric search, we call this a cross-buy parametric, would help. I suggest to use those when you can narrow down the eligibility of a component to be used in a certain application to 3 or 4 parameters only. So the data-driven decisions are about form fit function crosses that SiliconExpert can easily respond to and quickly. And second is who used on the component and sales engineering sites, that is cross-buy parametric. If you can identify the key attributes that qualify a component to be used in a certain product and design, parametric search can be helpful. But this requires, say, deep knowledge about the application and the role of the component in this one specifically. And I can walk you through these functions, let's say, in a separate meeting. But for today, I think monitoring dual sources that become single sources is one thing that you could do as the proactive element that Bjoern has described, and the data-driven decisions about finding crosses and using cross-by parametric are tools that can be pretty helpful to solve this problem.
Thank you. We have another good question coming in from Dat Pham from L3 Harris. Dat asks, how do you define critical components?
That's a pretty good question, and I give you the consulting answer now. It depends. And pretty much, it depends to your company. Let me give you some examples why it does depend. And you should manage that in advance as well. So again, don't let obsolescence manage you. Be proactive, blah, blah, blah. But what is making a critical component for your company? A critical component, for example, is a component that you want to be managing proactively, where you gather all the data from SiliconExpert, combine it with your internal data and so on, whether you use our AMSYS tool or not, and have it as a full-scale risk analysis. However, how to determine this, what is a critical component, and how to answer the question, what are the items that I really want to manage proactively and where I want to invest some money to be secured and have the insurance that nothing will happen. And to give you some examples, questions are usually, what type of component is it? Is the central integrated circuit having the same importance to your overall production capabilities as the screws or not, or a bolt? Maybe not, maybe yes. Is it a critical component to your production capabilities if it's only used once in one application, or is it used as the central component all over your products? These are just two variables that you could possibly identify as a production company. As a maintaining company or operator of system, you might want to ask yourself, and I'm going away a little from electronic components now, can I repair this item by myself? Because if yes, you wouldn't even worry about obsolescence or shortages and so on, as long as you get the underlying components from your bill of material to keep up the repairability that you have insourced. A critical component is where you usually get delivery just in time, whether it's spare parts or production materials and stuff. So let's get that straight. You can only answer that question if you really source through all your internal data, whatever variables you have in your PLM or ERP system, to answer that question correct. And once you have identified critical components, you better be proactive and do a full-scale risk analysis.
Oliver, do you agree with that completely?
I do agree, where I would paraphrase the question a little to make my summary, let's say, less confusing.
What do you want to say? Am I confusing you now? Okay, no, I hope everyone feels now confusing. This is really live. This is not pre-recorded.
So the question was about how do we define a critical component, and you said, how do we define risky components? And that, yes, the consulting answer is, it depends. My answer would be 8, because SiliconExpert can provide 8 different types of risk for which we are providing data so that you can balance by the relevance of the according type of risk for your business. And these 8 different types of risk that we can help you with is first, the overall risk of a component that consists out of lifecycle risk, and multi-sourcing risk, environmental risk or bottlenecks. So those were the first 5. Then there's also the risk for counterfeits. Then there are the risk implication coming out of geographical risks. And then there is the risk coming out of supply chain behaviors, which would derive from insights and predictions on how is the stock going to look like in the future. So predictability is risk element number 8. Therefore, however healthy and relevant the mix based on your priorities, That's what it depends on. Those are the 8 different elements of data that SiliconExpert can provide to help you identify components risky enough to show up at the top of your radar.
What do you think, Bjoern? Was that easy to understand?
When it comes to data and so on from the outside world, Oliver, not quite sure if you made it quite easier than I did. However, it's good that we're confusing people, so they might call up us later. However, I mean, when it comes to data from the outside world, forecasts, and is there any replacement options out there, and data sheets and all the technical information, I mean, there's reasons why we choose SiliconExpert completely integrated into our application. So yes and no, I would say you provide best data. However, and otherwise, you would take away my business model. Let's get that straight, because we are combining your data from the external world with internal data. And I don't think that no company out there can only work with external data, nor is there any company that can do everything by themselves, only using internal data. I think, to be honest, only in that combination, plus the processes that you need to set up, and we are way before software and so on, because software is just the end solution that is automating your processes. Having everything and correct data, what is usually a problem, and stuff, internally and externally combined, and not only to have data-driven decisions, what you said before, but information-driven decisions, what I would say. That might be a solution.
Okay, so here's actually, this is a good segue. We've got another question from Rajesh from Larson and Tubro, and I apologize if I pronounced any of that incorrectly. But this is really a question of how SiliconExpert and AMSYS are working together, because he asks, when do we use AMSYS and when do we use SiliconExpert? But the answer really is that they work in tandem, right? Bjoern, that you've got a software application that allows you to come up with the processes for obsolescence management, and then the information that you use to drive some of the workflow comes from SiliconExpert. Can you talk a little bit about how it works?
I mean, how it works is, and Oliver, you please pick on the SiliconExpert side what SiliconExpert can provide, because we're using all of their data, because it's great data. But I will start off. If you are looking for actually our software, we started off as a process consulting company. So I'm more the process guy. I'm process driven, and also implementing methods how to do full scale risk analysis. And this is what I tried to say in advance, so I'm really thankful to that question. What we do with our application, I would say we kind of sit on top of SiliconExpert data and automating individual processes, whether it be in a reactive process to find the best solution to your problem, or doing a full-scale risk analysis according to standards. How we are doing this, we are not only combining SiliconExpert data with internal data, like multi-level bill of materials, internal stock levels, and so on, and hosting that in a secure environment, even on customer and internal service. We also steer processes based on a lot of types of different data, because and I'm going a little bit away from the proactive full-scale risk analysis that I'm always talking about, what is usually a combination of likelihood and impact to your individual company. I'm going back a little to the reactive approach, how to proper and automatically do risk analysis. Because usually if I look at a lot of processes in diverse companies that I've helped to set up stable processes, they look alike, but they are not the same. But there's some simple question each and every company is usually asking themselves once it comes to an obsolescence problem, being it because of last time by notification they received end of life notice, or because of shortage, or because they just didn't have the right data in place in the first time, and now They just got the info without the time in advance. Question that we usually see company answering is, okay, I have an item that is obsolete now for whatever reason. Where is it built in? And what quantity? Who is responsible? From the engineering side? From the product management side? How much demand do I still have? What's my internal forecast? How much stock do I have on hand? Do I have already built in alternative or replacement components in my ABCL? Is there any qualification requirements? Does anyone need to sign up for different process steps? Do I have to inform my customer? And if so, what's the format and everything? And pretty much what's the lifetime of my own product? Because just to give you a simple example, if an item is forecasted to become obsolete in 5 years from now, I wouldn't mind if I only need this item for the next 3 years from now on. So let it become obsolete. I'm fine with that. There's no risk involved for my company. If I would need the same item for the next 20 or 25 years from now on, in a certain quantity, there is some risk involved and so on. So I might need to come to a different solution. So this is actually what we do. So we use the SiliconExpert data with all the forecasts and all the information they have, combine it with internal data and steer their processes. So to keep it simple, you might see us and our solution called the Lifecycle Management Client as a kind of SiliconExpert, so to say. And what we're sourcing through SiliconExpert and through the API, I think, Oliver, this is on you. Way better explain than I can.
API, oh God. Let's say
there was something with data.
No, not yet API. So we can talk about API later on as well, but I happen to dive into this way too deep. Let me say, when it comes to how do SiliconExpert and AMSYS work together, I do understand SiliconExpert as the beginning of a process. There is a data-driven reason to begin acting. Like SiliconExpert gives you the reason for the, how do I need to handle this? How do I make sure that I don't forget anything? What are the different steps? Where do I have to search? And then there is the advice of the process saying, well, first you quantify the risk. Means, okay, go back into SiliconExpert, quantify the risk. Then you check back in the process and say, yep, okay, done. Now I can quantify. This is basically a multi-sourcing risk, not an environmental compliance risk. What should I do if it is mostly a multi-sourcing risk? Well, try to focus on certain assets and so on and so on. So SiliconExpert is the data-driven origin of a process to kick off and the base where you find solutions based on certain metrics that are being relevant throughout the process. And this data, as it's being used with an AMSYS, is not a SiliconExpert clone. It's not a parametric search or a side-by-side comparison or a compliance analytics or a full export function or a report repository or so. It is in context. The relevant data is being used and analyzed to identify risks and to drive the process forward towards a solution. So of SiliconExpert being the data origin of the process to start, and the repository where data is being collected to tinker the solution. That's how we work together. We would still spend time in both systems, but the guidance in itself is happening in the AMSYS tool.
So AMSYS, so AMSYS then is the formula that solves the equation, and SiliconExpert are the numbers that you plug into that formula to solve that equation. Yeah. And it's sort of we talked about this a little bit before, a chicken and the egg. Which came first, the data or the process? And I think, Oliver, you just said the data comes first because that's where the problem starts. Oliver, would you agree with that?
It's like a game of chess. Of course, I would say that you have to have the data first. Without the taxonomy of data, it's difficult to identify how the problems look like that you are trying to handle. No, but in all fairness, I believe a business has to have the capability or a system in place to handle those problems. And yeah, it's a response to something that is happening on the outside. And if you don't know what's happening on the outside, it will be difficult on finding out how to handle this. And with so many internal activities, distinguishing those activities that rely on response to the outside world versus a monster that we don't have enough time to discuss. I think Bjoern can be much less confusing than I am, and I'm handing over.
Oliver, I summarize what you just said, and actually in your words, what you just said to me actually 2 years ago. You once said, where SiliconExpert is providing data as a service, we are providing process as a service. I mean, let's get straight. Obviously, we're not competitors and so on. We're working together, and we're making, and together as a combination of data and process, actually, we're making a lot of customers happy. So I summarize that in your own words, if you're okay with that. To pick up on Dwight's questions, sounds familiar to you, pretty good. To pick up on Dwight's question, what comes first, data or process? I mean, Oliver and I, we, as I just said in the early beginnings, actually, we share the same thinking, and we like good drinks. So we have a lot of talks actually outside of open webinars and so on. It's kind of the chicken and the egg problem. Nothing works without the other. You cannot have good processes in place without good data, being it external or internal, without combining the data. And you don't even know what to do with in the world if you don't have good processes in place, how to handle the data. So the equation is actually, or the answer is, nothing comes first. You need both. You need to have good processes in place to generate information out of data, and plus you even need to have good people in place who can handle the data to generate knowledge out of that information. So that's usually how it comes up. So the answer to the question is, again, nothing comes first. You need both data and processes.
Great,
yes,
thank you.
And it's okay. And it's okay if you begin with data.
Okay.
It depends. Again, consulting. Seriously, it depends what kind of company you are and stuff. But okay, that would definitely go way beyond that 1 hour that we have today. But it depends. We will have a private discussion.
We are coming to the bottom of the hour. We're coming to the top of the hour, guys. And I do want to turn back to another question that came in from our audience, and then I'll turn it over to George, and we can close out the webinar. This one comes in from Art from Amitech Rotron. Do you know what in the industry is causing short of end of life for high reliability parts? It appears that end of life of most parts are shortening more and more rapidly. This is a big problem for high reliability parts, as some were single source to start with, and some of the newer parts have lower reliability. Have you seen that, guys?
I mean, I can answer on the problem side of the question. If this is a high reliable part, and I mean, there was the question that we had from the audience before: what is a critical component for me, and so on, and how to identify that. So whether it is a high reliability part or not, if it comes obsolete, and if this is a critical part for you, you might encounter problems. That's for sure. So you better do a proper risk analysis. Do we see actually high reliability parts becoming obsolete and so on more often these days in terms of shortage and what the market is telling us and what my customers tell us and how we see actual forecasts and so on? This is becoming a bigger problem. Basically, this is what my answer is, but you can go in much more detail, Oliver.
Yeah, so I do see high-rel parts having more last time buy and even on short notice discontinuance and unavailabilities lately. However, most of these high-rel parts are single source by nature, for being vibration-proof, military-grade, automotive, fully exercised with the PPAP and everything. That data is there, and we know that they are being exposed. When they are having some certifications in automotive, that feels as if they should be available for longer time. But if it is just high-rel without those certifications, they have been single source anyways, and I would always suggest to single source to monitor the single on a specific list, so that we are aware of the single source risk factor overall. Or if you have lists in which you are monitoring the overall risk of your master parts list, then you might even decide to ignore the single source risks, knowing that those components are not technically replaceable with equivalents of other manufacturers. That option is not there. So if you sense other risks increasing, being it life cycle, being it counterfeits, being it environmental compliance, being it a decreasing amount of stock per distributor, then those are signals where you should decide or think about not a last time buy, but a bridge buy on an anticipatable problem. And how to derive that lists from bigger master part lists, like these high risk lists, I could show you in a separate meeting. This is possible. And it's the decision on consciously ignoring single sourcing risk so that you can focus more on the other influencers, or to just have a single source exclusive list and try to find mitigations as early as possible. Those are two approaches, but they would require putting these high-rel components on a podest and to monitor them with more discipline than the other components. At the end of the day, it's a process that is within proactive obsolescence management.
Thank you, Oliver, for that, and thank you, Bjoern, also for all of your answers. At this point, I'm going to put an end to the questions, although we still have plenty that we haven't gone to, and George will wrap up the podcast for us and let us know where we can get more information.
Yeah, all right. Well, thank you. That was some pretty exciting conversations there going on, as always, with Bjoern and Oliver. So for the audience, for more information related to today's webinar, you can visit any of the resource links available in the green folder icon on your screen. Within the next 24 hours, you'll also receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. So thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar and AMSYS and SiliconExpert live Q&A. Don't let obsolescence manage you, brought to you by AMSYS and SiliconExpert. In the next webinar of this series, Bjoern and Oliver will be joined by industry leaders and additional experts on obsolescence. As always, we'll be announcing the next webinar on our social media channels of both SiliconExpert and AMSYS, and our website, so stay tuned. This webinar is copyright 2021 by SiliconExpert. The presentation materials and opinions are owned by or copyrighted by SiliconExpert and AMSYS, and the speakers are solely responsible for their content and opinions. On behalf of our guests, AMSYS and SiliconExpert, I'm George Corralius. Thanks for your time, and have a great day.
Thanks a lot for hosting that, George. Dwight, thanks for the